material here, and I'm not sure where it's going to go. I'm probably going to run out of time. But in order to do this, I went back to a bunch of old bulletins, trying to refresh my memory about when did I have which fish and where did they come from and what did they do. And I ended up with about 3 pages of scribbled notes. Well, my blues were the second real show quality fish that I ever had. And at that time I had 5 or 6 tanks in a bedroom up over top of the garage at my parents' house. And water that was not suitable for guppies, and I still have the same water, but I've learned to deal with it. But I got some blues from Frank Ortega. A lot of you know him from a few years back. He bred mostly snakeskins. But I talked him into selling me his breeder pair of blues that he used to cross with the snakeskins to improve the color. And they were pupil fish from a line that he had. But I kept those fish going. I got them in 1988. And I kept them going without showing, without being involved in the I.F.G.A. for a couple of years. And I met someone, Alan Bias, who I found lived about an hour and a half from me. He was in the Virginia Guppy Club and involved in the I.F.G.A. He encouraged me to go to a show. We went to an annual in Columbus, Ohio in 1991, first guppy show I'd ever been to. And he talked me, I wasn't going to take any fish. He talked me into taking some fish. I took 2 fish, 2 males. I couldn't match any up. I didn't have enough to match and didn't know how to match them. But after a very adventurous trip in which my Jeep broke down and we left it on the side of the road and got a rental car, we got to the show. And I placed second and fourth with those 2 fish. So I was hooked. It was a very big show. There were over 1,000 entries in that show. One of the bigger shows I've ever been to, and I was Google-eyed because I had never seen that many good fish and that many people that I'd only read about. But those fish I kept going for about 1994, and I never won a color class with them. But they were exceptionally clean fish, and to me, clean fish is well proportioned. They had very good dorsal shape, very good caudal shape, and they were exceptionally clean in color, kind of a medium light blue. They're probably the best colored blues that I've ever had, particularly in consistency. I mean, they were just like peas in a pod as far as color. The problems I had with them was they split terribly easily, at least in my water. I always had split fins. And so I never got a lot of fish to show condition. But those that did get to show condition were very well-proportioned, clean, well-colored fish. And I was having some water issues that I wasn't capable of dealing with at the time that made it a little more difficult. But I wish I had that line back now, knowing what I know now, knowing how to handle the water now. I know I could do much better with them. But I gradually lost them to water quality issues and to inbreeding problems and lack of knowledge. But I did place second and third and fourth with those in the class championship in 93 and 92. So I was almost there with them before I messed them up and lost them. I went through a stretch there after that where I had a couple of lines that I got from Jim Alderson. His darker blues and lighter blues. The lighter blues were related to Tom Allen's fish. And I never had a lot of great, they were good fish, very good fish. The darker blues were very dark and very good color and sort of chunky, muscular fish, if you will. The lighter blues were much longer and rangier, but I got some whoppers out of that. I wish I had kept those fish around longer. They ended up getting pushed aside when I got another line. But I will mention the lighter blues that were related to Tom Allen's fish. I did get some silvers out of those. I tried very hard for several years to get those silvers to show condition, show size, and I could never do it. They were beautiful at 3 months, and then they kind of stopped growing, and they would have caudal problems. But if it were not for that short period of time, I wouldn't know what silvers were, but they just popped out. I tried going both ways with them, breeding silver to silver and just integrating them into that line, and I could never do anything with them. But they were beautiful at 3 or 4 months, and then they just stopped and faded out. But that's a little sidebar on the body color. And during that time, through Alan Bias, I met Paul Gorski, who was living in Virginia, but about 3 hours from me. We had a small guppy club going, but some pretty active members. And I got fish through Paul several times, and that's where those fish that I got from Jim Alderson came from. And later on, I got to know Tom Allen very well and got fish from him several times. So you'll hear repeatedly those names in these lines, but basically all of the fish I've had over the last 20, 25 years, one way or the other, were routed to me through those 3 or 4 people. And it always pays to spread those fish out to those guys, because you never know when you're going to need to get them back. And I've had to get them back a couple of times when I've messed them up. But about the time I lost those first blues I had, I was looking for another line of blues, and Paul sent out the red flag or white flag to Jim to get some blues for Bill. I was down there for a guppy club meeting at his house in Hampton while I was at a work convention up at the Tides Inn about an hour away. And the fish didn't show up in time for the meeting, but Paul called me, not knowing that I was not too far from him. Hey, the fish came in, can you come get them? Well, I drove back down on Saturday afternoon. Everybody else was playing golf, and Paul was not there. He left the house open. I went in, took a turn around his fish room, got the fish, and then I took one other turn around. Here, Bill, take one pair of these. He had gotten another line from Jim that were dark blues. These fish I'd originally seen in Paul's house up at, I guess, Elko. Very, very dark blues. They really caught my eye because they were so dark and very good matching colors. Well, I got those by accident only because I took one more turn around the room to take a look at the fish. And they went on to be the most successful line of blues that I've ever had. They popped out of greens in one of Paul's green drops. Every baby was blue, and they bred true. And how that happened or why, I have no idea. But those blues that I did, I won 4 class championships with those blues, 96, 97, 98, and 99. I almost didn't get them. They came out of greens, and I almost lost them before I really got them going in my tanks. I was having some water problems, some disease problems. I got down to 2 males, and about 5 or 6 females out of 1 drop. That's all I had. One really, really clean, small male that was very nice fish, just small, and a bicolor. I don't know where the bicolor came from. I tossed the bicolor. I bred that one male to all 6 sisters, got babies, and that was the beginning of that strain that I won 4 class championships with. But you don't have to start with a big fish. You just got to start with a clean fish. But a half dozen times, those fish almost didn't make it to my tanks. Mostly me being curious and wanting to look at the fish again, got them there. But thanks to Paul and Jim for getting them to me, because I did really well with them until I ran those in the ground, which is kind of a repeated theme in this story. I didn't know anything about crossing and was afraid to cross. They were strictly inbred for about 6 years, and I ran them in the ground inbreeding. They were still very fertile, still got fish, but I lost the dorsal match. The dorsals became black or olive or anything other than blue, and at the end they were almost blacks, period, even in the collar. So I finally gave up and let that strain go. I had several times I was given good advice to cross them to some really, really light blues. I didn't do it. I was afraid I would lose what I had, and obviously looking back, I should have done that. I probably could have saved that line, but they're probably the best fish, particularly for consistency, that I've ever had. And they weren't big, but they were big enough, and they were very good dorsal shape, very good dorsal collar match until I messed that part of it up, and very good, had good deportment, very good swimmers. And here again, I guess the moral of the story is, don't get too focused on one thing, particularly with blues. If you go too dark, they're going to go black on you. I had several other lines of blues from Jim Alderson after that for short periods of time. One in particular I remember that I did well with, but again, I managed to mess them up after a while. They were one of his sap lines that also produced some purples. And I think the purples were really better than blues. I just wasn't focused on raising purples, so I didn't keep them going as a separate line. I kept them blues and purples together because it's, at least from my point of view at that time, the purples seemed to improve the color of those blues. My problem with them was that for me, I tended to have a flag or slightly balloon dorsal in that line that I could never quite get out. When I selected away from that, I ran into other issues, and it may have been just my selection, but they were probably the second best fish I had as far as top of color. They were very, very clean and very evenly colored in the color, and when I did it right, they got big. They were very big fish. My current blues are another accident. Back about 2000, my greens were getting very washed out, and I made a bad selection. 2002 or 3, I guess it was. I made a bad selection on a breeder, and the dorsal shape was bad, and as always, when it's a bad dorsal, they breed true. And I messed my greens up doing that. And in trying to fix those, I got some purples that were from Joe Grimes, but they were one of Stanley's lines, Stanley's purples. They were only 1 or 2 generations removed from his tanks. I crossed one of those males into a couple of my females, trying to improve the dorsal shape and hopefully reinvigorate the color. Well, that's supposed to be a good cross, and you should get some greens and maybe even some purples. Well, I got maybe 25 or 30% really, really bad greens. They're almost splotchy greens, or dirty olive green with small dorsals. They weren't very vigorous. And I got some pretty decent blues. And the blues were a medium to light blue and very clean. They had a little irregular top line on the dorsal, but with selection I was able to get, so I tossed the greens and inbred the blues. And that's my current blues. You know, they don't come from a blue strain. But they gradually with time have become a very good line of fish. And the color is not the same, but similar to those original blues I had way back when, in that it's a very even colored blue. I get some light blues and I get dark blues, but the lighter blues are generally the better in this line. And through selection, I've gradually gotten that irregular top line for the most part out of the dorsal. The biggest problem I have with that line now is the dorsal tends to be, on average, a little skinny, not quite tall enough. I do get some that are correctly proportioned, and that's the ones that breed, and that's the ones I take to shows, but I haven't completely gotten out of that characteristic yet. But I'm real pleased with what I've gotten out of what was an accidental cross, really, for blues. Greens. My greens originally came from Jim Alderson. I bought some fish from him, and I can't remember exactly when. I went back and tried to find it, and my notes are since lost, and my old records that I used to keep, I no longer keep anymore. I just write a little bit of the genetic history of the fish on the tank, so I've lost a lot of information. But somewhere around 96, 97, 98, and they were really, really good greens. There was a time when Jim was tearing it up on the show bench with his greens. And I was concentrating on the blues at the time, so I just kept them going. I didn't show them hardly at all for a couple of years, and then just occasionally, because I never had enough of them. I was keeping 3 or 4 tanks of those fish, raising them drop from 1 or 2 females and raising them up, and that was pretty much it. But they got too inbred, and I probably made some bad choices on selection, but they got, well, they were very, very light, and they were fairly light green to begin with. So And I was talking to Tom Allen at a show. I got greens that used to be really good, but they're not so good now. I need to cross them. Well, I'll bring you some. He brought me one of his green females. First time I'd ever crossed anything. Crossed the cleanest, most evenly colored male I could find in my tanks, which wasn't that even, into that one female, and I got 2 drops of babies. And they're the 2 best batches of fish I've ever had. The size almost doubled. The intensity of the color was way, way more than it had been. The color was even, and even picked up a little dorsal size. But that cross is the origin of the greens that I've had for many, many years since then. And I did very well with them showing for 4 or 5 years there. Again, I made a mistake and messed them up pretty good. But I'm missing one storyline here. I can't remember the dates. I asked Paul this morning. At one point, Paul left Virginia and went to Florida and was there for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, Paul, something like that. I had some water quality problems and some disease problems with my fish about the time he was getting ready to move back to Virginia. So I basically dumped everything I had but a few tanks of fish and started Cloroxing tanks to get, I had gill flukes really bad, to get the gill flukes out. Paul sent me a box of fish back to keep his lines going for him until he could get moved and get his fish room built. Well, one of the things I tossed was those greens, but I got them back from Paul because we had shared fish several years earlier, and they were essentially the same line, although, of course, he had worked them for a few years. That's the moral of the story, where you better find somebody you can share your fish with, because you're probably going to need to get them back at some time when you mess them up. And fortunately, I was able to do that, and I got that line of greens back, and I actually did better with them showing after I got them back than when I had them previously, so that probably says something about Paul's skill as a breeder. But gradually, I started to lose the even green color. I was starting to get a band of light green on the trailing edge of the collar. And in conjunction with that, I made a bad choice of breeders at one point, and I bred a male that, I don't know if I can draw it, the top line of the dorsal, instead of coming back like it should, like that, it had just a little tiny little dip right there. Well, don't ever breed one like that, because I did, that sucker bred true. I mean, every male had that fault, and I couldn't get it out. So I bought fish from at an auction in, I think it was in the Chesapeake Club show. I don't remember when, 04, 05, 06, somewhere along there, that were Fred Raleigh from the New England Club. They were his fish. I found